Okay.
Oh, g'day, mate. How are you?
Oh, good. Look, I thought I'd tell you, Steve Jones, that amazing mayor of the Lockhart Valley, came down last week all the way to Terry Hills and sat in my office and told me the story of the cannery, and I'm going to get out and give them some support.
They need 70 million, don't they?
Yeah, 70 million. What they're trying to do, it appears Malcolm Turnbull's going to bring in some crowdfunding thing. I've said I'll put a substantial amount in, and I'll then become their sort of campaign helper director to try and get every Aussie who can afford it to put $200 or $300 in. And wouldn't it be fantastic if we could raise the money and own the cannery ourselves?
Well, it's a great thing to do. Somebody sent me an email about crowdfunding, which is basically what? That's what...
everyone puts in, you get on the computer, it's inexpensive, and you put in so much. It might be, I think you'd need a minimum of about $500. I'd say to everyone, don't invest unless you could afford to lose the money, but you never know. It could be another Apple. It could do really well. I can't see why we can't own our own cannery.
Why? I mean, it's just bloody amazing to me that we've got all this lovely food in Australia.
Yep.
And did he tell you the beetroot story?
The stories are all absolutely terrible about what's happened and how they're once again sort of ploughing food back into the ground, and there's absolutely nowhere where you can get... There's no cannery left. As you remember, I tried to save the Cowra cannery, but then Aldi started selling beetroot at 75 cents a can, and so then Woolies and Coles matched, and so then within about 6 months, Heinz moved to New Zealand, and someone tells me now it's coming from Japan or China or somewhere. China.
Yeah.
And so we just lost a complete industry. Now that's just not acceptable.
No, look, when you look around the world and you see what's happening in the world, we've got a lovely little country here.
Yep.
I assume, Dick, that people still need jobs here.
You'd think so.
Yeah. That's my feeling about
Mac, and just two other things very quickly. As you know, with Dick Smith Foods, we give the money away. We're going to give another $1 million away in about 3 weeks' time. Now, we used to have voting, but we just don't have enough staff to do that. So anyone who's listening, I know all of the supporters of the show support the charities we support, which is sort of typical farmers and Australian charities. If they just want to key Dick Smith Foods into Google, and there's a place where you can put comments. Give us some suggestions on where the money should go, and especially country-type charities, all helping people who are in distress and so forth, and we'll be making those decisions. And then the last point is that I'm going to be sort of getting into politics. There's a chap called Will Bourke who's standing in North Sydney in Joe Hockey's old seat, and I'm going to support him at Sustainable Population because all the other people are talking about how they handle the growth at North Sydney. As you know, that houses are being bulldozed and they're all going up in high-rise. North Sydney Boys High, they're now saying it's got to go high-rise. And my school, North Sydney Tech High, they closed it down and put a bloody great office building there. And all the discussion of all the politicians who are standing, even the independents, are saying, how do we cope with the millions of extra people? Actually, no one says, hold on, this is a democracy. We don't need the extra millions of people. And that's really important that people realise that. If we had about 70,000 immigration, which is still incredibly high by world standards, instead of 250,000, we can stabilise our population and have a fantastic life and free-range kids, and they can actually have backyards and play cricket in them. Imagine that.
There was a story in the Sydney Morning Herald the other day complaining about baby boomers not giving up their houses, which I think was completely wrong. What the story is that people buy houses and they knock them down and they build 3 houses where one was before, so there's no backyards, no backyards at all. The only backyards that survive are people that probably aren't selling their house because as soon as they're sold in Sydney in the burbs, and I assume it's the same in Brisbane and Melbourne and Perth, they just knock them down. There's no backyards. And that will change the basic nature of us as a place. Yeah,
we're going to be living like termites. Now, here's the interesting thing, and don't blame the people who sell, because if you don't sell, if you remember when I did that documentary for the ABC on population, we went to this lovely old lady's house because at Pymble, she decided, no, she didn't want to sell her house, and so Mirvac built completely around her, and so there she's got this house and looking up at 30 stories or whatever. It is just unbelievable, completely destroyed the lifestyle. Now, people who don't know Sydney, at a place called St Ives, which isn't even on a railway line, now as you drive there, it's like being in Shanghai. And what everyone has got to remember is you have to stop this perpetual growth one day. I mean, when we get to 100 million in Sydney, will that be too many? Why don't we actually, instead of going from 4 million to 8 million, actually state, look, we're going to live in balance like everything in nature, and we're just not going to keep growing. But there's no discussion, no political party, even the Greens are not even game to say it's impossible to keep growing forever. So Will Bourke is going to be saying that. No, he's not going to get in. He's not going to change government, but it would be really interesting to see if there are enough people to say to both parties, look, we don't want to keep growing. We're not stupid. And by the way, Macca, they say, we've got an ageing problem. Well, how do you solve that? By bringing more people in, because they get older. It just makes it worse, doesn't it?
Do we all get older? Dick, a couple of things I wanted to ask you. Firstly, did you hear Why I Live Where I Live this morning on the program?
I missed that.
You should. I'll put it on the podcast.
Put it on the podcast because I'll listen to that when I walk down the track.
Okay. The other thing is, how's your old company? It's not your company anymore. Dick Smith Electronics. What's happened there?
Well, it's disturbing what I've heard, because what happened was Woolworths sold the company. I sold it originally for about $25 million. Woolworths ran it for about nearly 40 years, employed lots of Australians, made a fortune over the years for all the mum and dad shareholders, the super funds. But then they sold it to this new group for two amounts, $20 million and $70 million. So they sold it for about $90 million. But then within about 12 months, they resold it for something like $200 million. Now, you'd have to be pretty stupid to think that someone could make $100 million in 12 months. So, of course, what's happened now, I understand, is the shares have all dropped in value, and the people who bought the shares at the latest thing are complaining. Well, I suppose I'm going to say, don't be greedy. If you think someone can make $100 million in 12 months, that's impossible. But I am hoping the company will do okay, because it employs 1,300 Australians. Pip and I, who started it with, Pip, was it $610 when we started, Pip? Yep, $610. That something still exists.
Unbelievable. Dick, I get lots of emails here.
Yep.
Terry Tisdale, he's a manufacturer I know, says there is now no fully owned Australian cannery operating in Australia since Windsor Farm closed in 2000. And Dick spoke loud about this national treasure closing. Eddie Leah, who I spoke to some months ago, said the supply chain of components such as cans is now the problem. The can manufacturing industry here to support those canning mills have either closed or are in overseas hands, with one of the largest recently being sold to China interest. It's really depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, what's depressing is, I mean, people complain, they say, Dick, you imported electronics. I said, well, of course, Japan made the best electronics, but we grow the best food, and that's what's ridiculous. We grow the best food. We should be exporting food all around the world.
Exactly. Dick, keep in touch.
Good on you, mate.
And I'll put it on the podcast, and you can have a listen to Why I Live. It's about her living in Sydney and about traffic jams and how she loves Sydney and how she loves Melbourne. We love our cities, but God help us. I mean, there must be a. Now, look, those people in North Sydney are saying how they're going to put a tunnel underneath the Spit Bridge and how they're going to cope with all the high-rise, and no one's actually saying, we're a democracy. We can decide that we don't have to grow forever. That's all I'm saying, because one day when we get to 1 billion people in Australia, we're going to have to stop growing. Let's stop about now and have about 26 million and live in the sweet point. In America now, the minimum wage is $8 an hour, because they have to share with 300 million people, and that obviously means everyone gets less. But look, we're all saved because now we have a minister of the built environment and the cities, so that'll all be fixed.
It'll all be fixed. Parramatta now, they're just bringing in a new high school. They're saying it's going to be in high-rise, and they're proudly saying it's going to be like Shanghai. Now, you've got to be joking. The beautiful thing about this country is the wide open spaces. So we need to have our schools with playgrounds. Every family, if they can afford it, needs to have a front yard and a backyard. Hey, can you run that song again about playing cricket in the backyard with Mum? Can we run that?
Yeah, that's around. I'll play that.
That. Because people will not know in another couple of decades. They'll say, "What's that? How did you do that?"
You know what I've got in my backyard? I've got blue-tongue lizards.
Teliqua skincoides, lovely blue-tongues.
And tadpoles and little ponds, and little possums come over, and I say, "Look at this," and we catch the tadpoles and we look at them.
But Macca, be careful, because one day suddenly you'll find that the neighbours will be forced to sell, because they'll say, we have to go, we have to take 8 million people in Sydney, and so you'll find that they'll sell their house, and in the end you'll be forced to sell yours, and it's completely forced. You'll be given all this extra money, but what can you do with it? Because to buy anything then will cost triple as much money.
Well, it's gone up. This is a little thing where my I think my parents bought their house for 80 quid, and that was a lot of money in those days.
Wow.
The house over the road sold for about $1 million about 18 months ago. The house next door to it just sold yesterday or the other day for $1.4 million. Right, so that's in 18 months that's gone up $400,000.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be bad if it was just inflation, but it's about 4 times less affordable. Pip and I bought our first house at Greenwich in the North Sydney electorate for $30,000. That same house now is over $2.5 million. It's 4 times less affordable. Now, what the politicians will tell you is, every decade we get wealthier, we get better off. No, we don't. Not if young couples now, both of them have to work, and then they're lucky to be in a little unit living like termites and not being able to have free-range kids. We can solve that completely by just not having ridiculously high immigration levels.
Dick, nice to talk to you.
Good on you, mate.
Let's hope we get a cannery.
Thank you, and we will. I'll be working on that cannery. We just need lots of listeners to support it.
Good on you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dick.
Thank you.
Bye. This